At 19, Abigail Carter was forced to honor a marriage promise made by her parents years before. The groom was a 35-year-old rancher she barely knew, and everyone in town felt sorry for her. But just weeks later, he made a shocking decision that left the entire town speechless and changed her life forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if you enjoy heartwarming stories of love, faith, and second chances, subscribe to the channel. Cold autumn winds swept across Cedar Ridge, rattling dry leaves along the wooden sidewalks while gray clouds drifted low above the valley. Abigail Carter sat quietly beside the front window of her family's farmhouse, staring at the distant hills she had known her entire life. At 19, Abigail was slender and graceful, with long chestnut hair that fell in soft waves past her shoulders and thoughtful hazel eyes that often revealed emotions she tried hard to hide. Her fair skin carried the last traces of summer sunlight, and her gentle nature had made her well-liked throughout town. Yet beneath her calm appearance lived a stubborn determination that had grown stronger during the difficult months of her father's illness. Across the room sat her father, Samuel Carter, a 60-year-old rancher whose once powerful frame had been weakened by sickness. His silver-streaked hair had thinned considerably, and deep lines marked a face weathered by decades of hard work. Samuel was respected throughout Cedar Ridge for his honesty and loyalty, qualities that had led him to make a promise many years earlier to his closest friend. That promise was the reason Abigail's future suddenly felt no longer her own. When Abigail was a child, Samuel and his best friend, Andrew Brooks, had agreed that if their children remained unmarried when they came of age, they would unite the two families through marriage. At the time, it had seemed like nothing more than a sentimental agreement between lifelong friends. Now Andrew was gone, Samuel was seriously ill, and both families intended to honor the promise. The man waiting at the end of that promise was Nathan Brooks. Nathan was 35 years old and owned the largest cattle ranch in the county. Tall and broad-shouldered, he carried the rugged appearance of a man who spent every day outdoors. Dark brown hair touched the collar of his work coat, while a neatly trimmed beard softened the sharp lines of his jaw. His calm blue eyes rarely revealed much emotion. Since losing his father nearly 15 years earlier, Nathan had devoted himself entirely to the Brooks Ranch. Responsibility had shaped him into a dependable and respected leader, but it had also left little room for marriage or personal happiness. Abigail barely knew him. She remembered only brief encounters from childhood. Yet the entire town was already discussing their upcoming wedding. As whispers spread through Cedar Ridge, Abigail struggled with a growing sense of helplessness. It felt as though decisions made before she was old enough to understand them were now determining the rest of her life. The wedding day arrived sooner than she wanted. As she stepped into the small church, uncertainty weighed heavily on her chest. Then Nathan looked at her. There was no ownership in his eyes, no satisfaction, no sense of obligation fulfilled, only quiet respect. And for the first time since hearing about the old promise, Abigail felt genuinely surprised. The ride to Brooks Ranch took nearly an hour, and Abigail spent most of it staring at the rolling hills beyond the wagon. She had prepared herself for rules, expectations, and the quiet loss of freedom she imagined came with marrying a man she barely knew. Instead, Nathan Brooks drove the wagon in comfortable silence, never once attempting to fill the distance between them with forced conversation. When they finally reached the ranch, Abigail understood why people spoke about it throughout Cedar Ridge. Brooks Ranch stretched across hundreds of acres of pasture land. Large red barns stood against the autumn sky, while cattle moved slowly across distant fields. The place felt less like a home and more like a small world with its own rhythm. Nathan helped her down from the wagon before carrying her suitcase inside. The house itself was large but simple, built for practicality rather than display. He stopped outside a room on the second floor. "This room is yours," he said calmly. Abigail looked inside. The room was bright, overlooking the eastern pasture. Fresh curtains hung beside the windows, and a small writing desk sat near the corner. She turned toward him. "Mine?" Nathan nodded. "You don't need permission to write letters, visit your father, or make decisions about your own time. Our parents made the arrangement. What happens after that is ours to decide." The words caught her off guard. After weeks of fearing this marriage, she suddenly found herself uncertain how to react to kindness. The following days became an education. The first person Abigail truly met was Martha Reed, the ranch housekeeper. Martha was a sturdy woman in her early 60s, with gray hair always pinned tightly beneath a simple bonnet. Years of hard work had left her hands rough and strong. Though not naturally warm, she was respected by everyone because she was fair, practical, and incapable of dishonesty. "You'll learn quickly here," Martha told her on the first morning. "The ranch rewards people who pay attention." Abigail soon discovered the truth of those words. She learned where supplies were kept, how meals were organized for ranch hands, and how every part of the household connected to the larger operation outside. She also met several of the ranch workers. Jacob Turner, a broad-shouldered man of 40 with sandy blonde hair and a permanent sunburn, supervised most of the cattle operations. A broken leg years earlier had ended his dreams of competitive rodeo riding, leaving him quieter and more cautious than he once had been. Then there was Ben Miller, a lanky 20-year-old ranch hand with freckles and messy red hair, who seemed incapable of standing still for more than 30 seconds. Ben talked constantly, laughed loudly, and somehow managed to make mistakes without ever causing serious trouble. Abigail expected Nathan to dominate everyone around him. Instead, she watched him listen. When Jacob offered concerns about winter feed supplies, Nathan listened. When Ben damaged a fence section through carelessness, Nathan corrected him without humiliation. Nobody seemed afraid of him. They trusted him. That realization stayed with Abigail. One afternoon, she noticed an old black-and-white border collie sleeping beside the barn entrance. The dog, named Scout, was nearly 10 years old and moved with the stiffness of age. Yet, whenever Nathan walked past, Scout would slowly rise and follow him. "He's been with me since he was a pup," Nathan explained. There was a softness in his voice Abigail had not heard before. The weeks passed. Nathan never entered her room without knocking, never questioned her letters home, never reminded her that she owed him anything. In fact, he rarely asked for anything at all. One evening during supper, Abigail accidentally dropped a plate while helping Martha clear the table. The plate shattered across the floor. Embarrassment immediately flooded her face. She expected criticism. Instead, Nathan simply stood, fetched a broom, and helped clean the pieces. "No harm done," he said. "That was all. No lecture, no disappointment. Nothing." Later that night, Abigail sat alone by her bedroom window overlooking the moonlit pastures. The ranch was quiet. The marriage still felt strange. Nathan was still a man she barely knew. Yet as she replayed the past few weeks in her mind, one uncomfortable thought continued returning. Maybe the man she had feared before the wedding did not actually exist. Maybe she had married someone entirely different. By the middle of November, Abigail had settled into the daily rhythm of Brooks Ranch. The uncertainty that had followed her from the wedding had not disappeared completely, but it no longer occupied every corner of her thoughts. Instead, she found herself paying attention to details. The condition of the pantry, the timing of deliveries, the amount of feed being used, and the quiet concerns people discussed when they assumed she was not listening. One rainy afternoon, Abigail was helping Martha organize household records when she noticed several unpaid invoices tucked inside a ledger. She frowned. "These are behind schedule." Martha glanced at them, only by a little. "Mr. Brooks always catches up." The answer should have satisfied her. It didn't. That evening after supper, Abigail approached Nathan in his study. He sat behind a large oak desk, reviewing ranch accounts. The warm light from an oil lamp revealed faint shadows beneath his eyes that she had somehow never noticed before. "May I ask something?" Nathan closed the ledger immediately. "Of course," she hesitated. "How is the ranch really doing?" For several seconds, he simply looked at her. Then, without argument or avoidance, he slid one of the account books across the desk. "If you want to know, you should see it yourself." Abigail spent nearly an hour studying the numbers. The ranch was not failing, but neither was it thriving. Several years of drought had reduced grazing quality. Feed prices had increased, while cattle prices had fluctuated unpredictably. Brooks Ranch still looked successful from the outside, but the margins were thinner than most people realized. When she finally looked up, Nathan was watching her, not impatiently, simply waiting. "You trusted me with this?" you asked. The answer was so simple it almost annoyed her, yet somehow it mattered. The next morning Abigail walked behind the main house and stopped beside an abandoned garden plot nearly hidden beneath weeds. "What happened here?" she asked Martha. "Mrs. Brooks planted vegetables there years ago." Abigail blinked. "Nathan's mother?" Martha nodded. After she passed, nobody kept it going. Abigail looked across the neglected ground. An idea began forming. Within a week, she was clearing weeds, repairing fencing, and sketching plans. Soon, she added a small chicken enclosure beside the garden. Ben laughed when he first saw it. "You planning to feed the entire county?" Abigail smiled. "Not yet." The project started small. Fresh vegetables reduced grocery expenses. Egg production steadily increased. Nothing dramatic, nothing miraculous. Just consistent improvement. Weeks passed. The ranch hands gradually stopped viewing her as a temporary visitor. They began asking questions, seeking opinions, trusting her judgment. One morning, Jacob arrived carrying a damaged supply order. Normally, he would have taken the problem directly to Nathan. Instead, he brought it to Abigail. "Think you can figure this out?" She did. And the shipment was corrected without additional costs. The respect she earned felt different from politeness. It felt real. Near Christmas, another new face arrived at the ranch. Ethan Cole was a 28-year-old accountant from Cedar Ridge with short black hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a serious expression that often made people think he was unfriendly. In reality, Ethan was simply cautious. Years earlier, his family's general store had collapsed after poor bookkeeping nearly bankrupted them, leaving him obsessed with financial accuracy. Nathan hired him temporarily to review several ranch contracts. During one meeting, Ethan looked from the papers to Abigail. "You reorganized these expense records?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Whoever did this probably saved the ranch a considerable amount of money." Nathan said nothing, but Abigail noticed the faintest hint of approval in his expression. Later that evening, she found him repairing a saddle in the barn. "You could have corrected him," she said. Nathan looked up. "About what?" He assumed I helped more than I actually did. Nathan returned his attention to the leather strap. "I think he underestimated how much you've actually done." The words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. For the first time in months, Abigail felt something she had not felt since childhood. Ownership. Not of land, not of buildings, of purpose. She was no longer the young woman being carried along by decisions made years before her birth. Every improvement in the garden, every saved dollar, every solved problem, those were her choices. Her work, her contribution, and perhaps the most surprising part of all was that Nathan seemed to see it before anyone else. For the first time since arriving at Brooks Ranch, Abigail no longer felt like a guest. She felt like she belonged. Winter had barely loosened its grip when trouble arrived at Brooks Ranch. It came in the form of Walter Hayes. Walter was a wealthy investor in his late 50s, tall and sharply dressed even in rural settings. His silver hair was always perfectly combed, and his expensive black coats made him stand out wherever he went. Years of successful land acquisitions had given him enormous confidence. He was known across 3 counties for buying struggling ranches, consolidating properties, and turning natural resources into profit. Most people admired his success. Others feared it. Nathan first mentioned him one evening during supper. "He wants to buy the ranch." Abigail looked up. "All of it?" Nathan nodded. "Land, water rights, everything." "What did you tell him?" "No." The answer was immediate. Abigail expected that to be the end of it. It wasn't. Over the following weeks, strange questions began appearing. Surveyors visited neighboring properties. County records were requested. Old land maps were suddenly being reviewed. The pattern disturbed Abigail. One afternoon, she accompanied Ethan Cole to the county records office to compare several historical property documents. Something about the timing felt wrong. The county clerk helping them was Harold Finch, a thin man in his 60s with wire spectacles and neatly parted gray hair. Harold had worked in county records for nearly 40 years. His quiet personality and obsessive attention to detail had earned him a reputation as the man who knew more about local land history than anyone alive. While reviewing older documents, Abigail noticed an inconsistency. A decades-old access route crossed a small section of the northern boundary of Brooks Ranch, The route had never been used, but legally, it had never been fully removed from county records either. Her stomach tightened. If someone challenged ownership through that forgotten easement, it could create a lengthy legal dispute over part of the ranch's water access. Harold studied the paperwork. "You're right," he admitted. "If someone wanted leverage, this is where they'd start." That evening, Abigail explained everything to Nathan. For several minutes, he remained silent. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "I never saw it." "No," he said honestly. "You were." The next 3 weeks became a race against time. With Harold's assistance and Ethan's documentation, they filed updated ownership claims, corrected historical records, and secured the legal protections before Walter's attorneys could move forward. The challenge ended before it truly began. Walter Hayes never openly admitted defeat, but the legal pressure stopped, and Brooks Ranch remained protected. The matter might have ended there. Instead, Nathan began planning something. Abigail noticed it immediately. Several private meetings, unexpected trips into town, documents she was not allowed to see. Whenever she asked questions, Nathan only smiled slightly and changed the subject. That alone made her suspicious. The answer arrived at Cedar Ridge's annual spring market. The entire town seemed to be there. Farmers, merchants, ranchers, and families crowded the square. Among them stood Samuel Carter, looking healthier than he had months earlier. Abigail was speaking with Martha when Nathan quietly asked everyone for a moment of attention. Even Walter Hayes, standing near a feed supplier's booth, turned to watch. Nathan stepped forward. His posture was calm as always. His voice carried easily across the square. "Most of you know my wife." The crowd chuckled softly. Nathan continued. When Abigail arrived at Brooks Ranch, many people assumed she was simply honoring an old family promise. Several faces shifted uncomfortably. Nathan wasn't finished. What they didn't see were the things that happened afterward. He described the garden, the household savings, the records she organized, the legal issues she discovered, the work she contributed every day. Abigail stood frozen. The attention felt overwhelming. Then Nathan held up a document. 3 days ago, I completed the transfer of ownership for 250 acres of South Creek pasture land. The square became silent. Nathan turned toward Abigail. The land belongs entirely to her. For a moment, she honestly thought she had misunderstood. Nathan continued. It isn't a wedding gift. It isn't shared property. It's hers. She earned it. The silence somehow became even heavier. Then whispers spread through the crowd. Shock, confusion, admiration. Walter Hayes looked genuinely surprised. Samuel Carter looked as though he could barely breathe. Abigail stared at the document in Nathan's hands. The land mattered. Of course it mattered. But suddenly she understood why tears were threatening to form. It wasn't the acreage. It wasn't the value. It wasn't even the security. For the first time since the wedding, someone had publicly recognized everything she had become. Not as Nathan's wife, not as the daughter of Samuel Carter, not as a promise made by two fathers, as Abigail herself. And somehow that meant more than the land ever could. Spring arrived slowly across Cedar Ridge. Fresh grass covered the pastures surrounding Brooks Ranch, and the cattle moved through fields that looked healthier than they had in years. Life seemed to be growing everywhere Abigail looked, and lately she found herself thinking less about the marriage agreement that had brought her here and more about the man she saw every day. Nathan had never changed. That was what surprised her most. He had not become kinder because she had helped save the ranch. He had not become more attentive because the town now admired her. He was exactly the same man he had been from the beginning. Steady, honest, dependable. The difference was that she finally understood him. One afternoon, Abigail stood alone near South Creek. The 250 acres Nathan had transferred into her name. The land stretched beneath the warm sunlight, green and alive. Months earlier, she would have looked at it and seen security. Now she saw responsibility and a future. Nathan approached from across the pasture. Scout followed several yards behind, moving slowly but stubbornly despite his age. Nathan stopped beside her. "You've been out here a while." Abigail smiled faintly. "I've been thinking. That usually means something important?" She laughed softly. It was becoming easier to laugh around him, much easier than before. For a moment she watched the creek water moving through the grass. Then she turned toward him. "I have something to tell you." Nathan immediately became serious. Abigail could almost see him preparing for bad news. The reaction made her smile again. "I'm pregnant." Everything stopped. The breeze, the conversation, even Nathan himself. For several seconds he simply stared at her. The calm rancher, who never seemed surprised by anything, suddenly looked completely unprepared. His blue eyes widened, his jaw tightened, then relaxed. Abigail had never seen so much emotion on his face at once. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Yes." Nathan looked away briefly toward the fields. When he looked back, there was something different in his expression. Relief, joy, disbelief, all mixed together. For the first time since she had known him, words seemed difficult for him to find. Abigail realized she loved him in that exact moment, not because of the land, not because of the ranch, not because of anything he had given her, but because he cared so deeply and never demanded recognition for it. Nathan stepped closer. "Are you happy?" The question surprised her. Not whether he was happy, whether she was. "Yes," she answered, "I am." His smile appeared slowly, rare, genuine, and somehow more valuable than any speech. The months that followed became some of the happiest either of them had known. The ranch continued improving. The garden expanded. The chickens multiplied. Samuel Carter visited often, his health stronger than it had been the previous year. The awkwardness that once existed between him and Nathan gradually disappeared. They spent long afternoons discussing cattle prices, weather forecasts, and future improvements to both properties. Even Walter Hayes eventually disappeared from local conversation after purchasing land elsewhere. Life moved forward. In early winter, Abigail's labor began. Nathan remained calm for exactly 3 minutes. After that, everyone on the ranch noticed the truth. He was terrified. Martha spent most of the day ordering him out of rooms he wasn't helping in. "You're making yourself useful nowhere," she informed him repeatedly. Nathan ignored her, then obeyed her, then returned anyway. Late that evening, a doctor arrived from Cedar Ridge. Dr. Henry Lawson was a 50-year-old physician with thinning blonde hair, tired gray eyes, and decades of experience delivering babies throughout the county. Years of long nights and difficult cases had made him calm during emergencies and almost impossible to rattle. Several hours later, a healthy baby girl entered the world. Nathan stood silently beside the bed, holding his daughter for the first time. Abigail watched him. The moment felt strangely familiar, not because she had seen it before, because she had imagined it. Without realizing she had been imagining it. The following Sunday, word spread through Cedar Ridge faster than any official announcement. People who once pitied Abigail now told a different story. They spoke about the successful ranch, the child, the marriage, the partnership. Most importantly, they spoke about how wrong they had been. Months later, Abigail and Nathan stood together near South Creek while their daughter slept peacefully in her mother's arms. The old agreement between their fathers had started everything. But neither of them thought about that anymore. The promise had brought them to the same road. Everything afterward had been their own choice, and standing together beneath the wide Montana sky, surrounded by the life they had built through trust, patience, and daily acts of quiet loyalty, both of them understood the same truth. Their marriage had begun with an arrangement, but it had become something neither family could have planned. It had become love. Sometimes the most meaningful relationships don't begin the way we expect. They grow slowly through trust, respect, patience, and the small choices people make for each other every day. Abigail and Nathan's story reminds us that first impressions are not always the full story, and that a life built together often becomes stronger than a life carefully planned. Perhaps all of us have faced moments when the future looked different from what we imagined. Yet sometimes unexpected paths lead to unexpected blessings. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a little hope today. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what part of this story spoke to you the most? And if you enjoy heartwarming stories about faith, family, kindness, and second chances, be sure to subscribe and join our growing community. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, fill your home with peace, and guide your steps in the days ahead. Thank you for spending this time with us, and we'll see you in the next story.